Well, thanks very much. I am Brian Spears, founder and CEO of New Age Meats, and I'd like to just share with you that the definition of meat is changing. But what do I mean by that? Well, meat in the last few centuries has been defined as the muscle, fat, and connective tissue coming out of the carcass of a slaughtered animal. So here we have a pig, similar to the pigs that we make, or the pork that we make. But looking back further, we can see that meat didn't actually used to mean that. The definition of meat had changed. Well, if that's true, then what was meat previously? Well, if we look back in the Middle Ages, in Middle English, there was meat, and that meant food, but it also meant nourishment and sustenance. And if you wanted to specify that the meat was from an animal, you would actually call it flesh meat. But you could also specify green meat for vegetables, or if you wanted to, you could say white meat for dairy products. So if you think about it, meat was food, but over time, the definition changed. But that's okay. Language is fluid, and definitions continue to change. In fact, today, you can go to a restaurant or a grocery store and get meat made from plants. So for instance, that's how Impossible Foods refers to their product. And they did a really good job in changing that definition. When they rolled out their product to their first restaurant partners, they trained the waitstaff to never use the term veggie burger or vegan burger, even if a customer called it that. It was always meat made from plants. And customers were into it. They've been increasingly buying plant-based meats by double digits year over year. And if we were to go and dig into those numbers, we find, rather crucially, that the younger generations are the ones most into it. They're identifying plant-based meat as the meat of the future. A recent study showed that 18% of teens eat plant-based meat. And another study from last year showed that 72% of millennials with kids are consuming plant-based meats more often than the 60% of millennials without kids. So they're teaching their kids young that the definition of meat is changing. We're witnessing a generational shift in perception. Now you might say, well, that's just impossible, changing the definition of meat through marketing. It doesn't really count. But let's look at another example. Now this would be a fun experiment if I could see everyone's hands, but we can simply imagine it. So think to yourself, is pork a white meat or a red meat? Now, whether you said one or the other is probably determined by your nationality, whether you're an American or not, because of this statement: pork, the other white meat. This is a 1987 ad campaign by the National Pork Council, National Pork Board. Even though the USDA, which regulates the sale and quality of meat, classifies pork as a red meat because of its myoglobin content. Now, fun fact, New Age Meats actually started in the UK. And back then, I was chatting with quite a few Europeans. There were Europeans in the UK at that time, like the UK people were Europeans, not as much anymore. And they were incredulous. They're like, wait a minute, no, like pork's a red meat. You mean to tell me that Americans think it's actually white meat? And indeed they do. So we can say that marketing doesn't matter and that pork is still red meat, but the way we think of pork drives our behavior. In fact, the sales of pork in the US rose 20% after this campaign. 20% of a commodity product, of increasing sales of a commodity product is huge. Now, in 2000, a study conducted by Northwestern University found that the other white meat brand was the 5th most memorable promotional tagline in the history of contemporary advertising. If we think about it, we can go a step further and find that the pork producers began actually making the meat more white in response to what consumers demonstrated they wanted, which changed not just the myoglobin, but also the amount of fat and saturated fat, which all decreased. According to the USDA in 2005, on average, about 16%, that white or pork now had 16% less total fat and 27% less total saturated fat. So there's a cycle between what the public perceives, what they want, and then how that product changes to give what the public perceives again. If people's perception of a definition changes, then their behavior changes, regardless of whether that comes from marketing or elsewhere. Which is why we see that many entities aren't on board with the evolution of the definition of meat. They don't want consumers to think of meat as anything other than that coming from a slaughtered animal, because they want to protect their market share. But again, that matters little if the youngest generation knows that the definition of meat is changing. It's only a matter of time. So I've said a lot, the definition of meat is changing, but changing to what? Is it just plant-based meat? Well, no, not really. To understand what it's changing to, then we really need to understand why people eat meat and break that down. Why did people eat meat? Well, they eat it for two big factors. What meat delivers to our body, and then what it delivers to our identity. And it's important to note that in both cases, we really are seeking to understand existing meat eaters. After all, 95% of the world, roughly 95% of the world eats meat, and we want to make the meat that they want. So the first thing that meat delivers to our body is a sensory experience, and we'll jump into that more and explore it in more depth in a bit. The next is health. Many people feel a certain amount of meat is healthy, and the right amount of meat is healthy, which is why they responded so well to the pork, the other white meat marketing campaign. They eat it for the protein, for the minerals, for the vitamins. They eat it because of how they perceive it makes their body look and feel as a result. They eat it because they feel good eating it. And that's hand in hand with safety. People expect that the meat they eat will be safe for them and their family. And they would love it if they also felt that the meat was safe, not just for them, but for society as a whole to consume. In other words, public safety. And the other big reason there on the right that people eat meat is identity. They identify personally as a meat eater. Being a meat eater makes them feel a certain way. And that's cultural. And that's played out in how we prepare our meat, how it appears in our recipes, how you envision it on the plate, surrounded by your favorite veggies or carbs. And if we expand the circle beyond ourselves to our family, this brings to light how we consume meat when our families gather, whether it be burgers in the backyard or wings while watching a game. And if we keep expanding that circle, then it's how we identify with our larger cultural community. It's the turkey at Thanksgiving or the goat at Eid. Meat satisfies all these needs, and the new definition of meat has to acknowledge that and satisfy those same needs. Now, returning as promised to the sensory experience, for most of us, the number one reason we eat meat is the sensory experience of eating meat. It tastes good, and not just taste, but it's the smell when we're cooking it. It's the sight of the juices when you cut the meat and it runs clear. It's the bounce in your mouth when you chew it. It's how your mouth waters. It's how your stomach rumbles. Now, speaking from a food research perspective, we pair together the taste and the aroma because we interpret the volatile compounds that we smell coming off the meat as taste. And we pair the appearance and texture because they're more linked to how the meat is physically structured. So this is meat. And for millennia, that experience of eating meat has only been obtainable by slaughtering and cooking an animal. But today, we have better options. We recognize that once we break down the reasons we eat meat for our body and for our identity, we see that we can deliver those needs a different, better way. And we understand that the real task is to meet and exceed those needs. So meat isn't the tissue of a slaughtered animal. Meat isn't even the muscle, fat, and connective tissue that comes out of a cultivator. It is the true heritage of the word meat. It is food. It is sustenance. It is nourishment. It is the delivery of the meat experience. Meat is that which delivers the experience of eating meat. And when you understand that, you're no longer tied to a production method. You're not bound to what people tell you meat is in order to protect their interests. Now, from a cultivated meat perspective, the cells are great at delivering the taste and the aroma. But without more complex scaffolding and expensive tissue engineering, they're not that great at delivering the appearance and the texture. However, as I've said now 100 times, the definition of meat is changing. It's not just animal cells. We found that plant-based ingredients are really good at delivering that texture and appearance. This yields a hybrid product, a blend of cultivated meat and plants, the best of both worlds. Now that's why we take an integrated approach to making meat. I've mentioned Impossible Foods a few times, and some of you may be aware that Pat Brown does not love cultivated meat, but we love him. We love him because Impossible has been on the leading edge of the future of meat. And so we have hired food researchers and engineers trained in Impossible Foods to integrate those plant ingredients with our cells. It's not trivial. You can't just take plant ingredients and cells, mush them together, and have an amazing tasting sausage. You actually have to balance and highlight what the cells offer with what the plants offer. That takes continuous iteration, planning, taste panels. And that means here in New Age Meats, we put together an integrated team of biologists, bioengineers, along with food researchers and food engineers to make this integrated product of cultivated meat and plant ingredients. And we're hiring. So we have a brand new website. Several of you have commented on that already. Thanks very much. We're very proud of it. And you can go to our careers page and you can see a bioengineer listing there. But we're also dramatically expanding our intern program. So those of you wondering how to first get started in cultivated meat, whether you're a high school graduate or in college, and you want to see how a cultivated meat company works and how they perceive of making a product, we invite you to come and join us. Can't see it quite yet on our website, but you'll see it there next week. Because we make an entire product. We don't just make cells. We don't make cultivated meat cells that we hand off to someone else. We balance the meat that we make with the crucial plant ingredients. The definition of meat has been changing and will continue to change. And we're proud to be a part of bringing this new age of meats to consumers. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to coin a term for this fluidity of the definition of meat, but I can't think of something that doesn't sound insanely unappetizing.
Insanely unappetizing.
Meat fluidity gets problematic, right?
Meat fluidity. That's meat fluidity.
We've
iterated quite a few mottos, like taglines. Meat fluidity. We'll try that. Insanely unappetizing. We discarded pretty early, actually.
No, thank you so much. A great perspective. And I think it's sort of maybe in some perspective a sad reality that marketing has such a strong effect on how we perceive reality. But on this, by the same token, it's also a lever that we have the opportunity to pull.
Yeah, 100%. I started very much on the technical side of my career. So I'm trained as a chemical engineer and then went into systems engineering, application engineering, and then moved into technical product marketing. And you find that marketing side drives the behavior. It is not trivial. And a lot of people on the technical side will kind of discard it. But when it shapes behavior and then what consumers want, then that ends up shaping what the engineers and scientists can do. So it's absolutely crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. And even more than at the industry level, at the sort of societal level, it's really has a power to change sort of based on understandings of things more than just in our little silo. So we have some great questions coming in here.
Cool.
So first one from Lindsay. What do you think about the label meat alternative? Do you think that this covers the current market, or should we look for something completely different, especially given the sort of opportunities that you're mentioning for things that don't really match our current definition of what meat actually is? Is cultured meat even a meat alternative?
It is a great question, and I think this has been a kind of a continuous question of those in the community of what we're calling what we make, right? So is it cultivated, is it cultured, is it cell-based, is it clean, is it whatever? And at the distillation, all of us feel that it's meat. But the issue is then how is that a differentiating label for consumers? If they walk up to a restaurant or just to a supermarket, how do they know that they're buying the meat that they want as opposed to a meat from another source? So alternative proteins, alternative meat alternatives, I think right now is a decent label to make that differentiation. So in the future, I think that this will just be meat. That there's a time when we'll look back at how meat was created and recognize that was meat made from an animal, but meat now is made this other much more sustainable way that delivers much more of the benefit of the meat experience. So I'm fine with it for now.
Yeah, and that's absolutely the future that I think everybody is hoping for. And to realize that right now we're in this sort of volatile intermediate stage where these questions are relevant. It's probably just a brief stage, actually, or we hope.
Definitely, yeah.
Oh, sorry, 1 second. Just trying to sort through these questions here.
No problem. I'm just hanging out here, the waterfall. Nice.
Nice waterfall.
Thank you.
So actually a phenomenal question from Diego, which I think was also asked yesterday. We didn't have a chance to get to it, but do you think that we have the opportunity to rethink not only the definition of meat and how we make it, but also the ways that we consume it?
Oh, it's such a good question. Yeah. So what I noted there in the identity portion is essentially how when we perceive meat, how do we imagine it? Where does it show up on our plate? Where does it show up in our recipes? And so right now, it's really important for us to meet the consumer where they are. If you were to imagine that we can make something that's really tasty and makes your mouth water and amazing, but it's in the form of like a shake, like you have this meat shake, so you drink it. Then it's a question of like how do people think about that in their diet, on their plate, in their meals? What you don't want is this kind of additive thing that floats around where people are looking to integrate it into their lives. What you want is for them to know what that is. You don't want to redefine that. And so what you really want is for them to recognize that this is a center of the plate item that they're used to eating and to replace what they're eating with this. And so that's what we target first. And it's also one of the reasons that we target the taste profile and the product profile, frankly, that people are used to. So we make a pork product, a sausage that tastes like sausage, tastes like what it is now. Now, with our technology, we can make it taste, we can actually change the taste fundamentally, and we can make it taste better than existing pork sausage. But then the question in people's mind is like, wait a minute, this doesn't taste like what I'm used to. This is can they not taste can they not make it taste like this? Like, what I really want is what I'm used to. And so in the beginning, we really want to meet consumers where they are and develop that trust. Let them know that this is what you have been eating. It's what you eat with your families, what you eat in your community. And then as we show that we can make a tastier, healthier, safer, more sustainable product, then we can walk them through continually to an even better product. So we can start to enhance these taste experiences. We can go into different formats that we don't yet have access to. But we often compare our technology to the transition of our technology to like a horse and buggy. So the way that we've been producing meat for millennia is kind of a horse and buggy. But in the beginning, you kind of have to, if you even look at the earliest incarnations of an automobile, they tended to mimic what a horse and buggy looked like because that's what people's minds was. You have this, if you presented them a car now, they just wouldn't even know how to think about it. So in the same type of way, we have to meet where consumers are now, but then because the technology platform is so radically different, we can quickly move to a better place.
Yeah, I think a great empiric example of this idea of sort of meeting people where they are, that's from the food space, and a recent one is the sort of success of a lot of oat milks, where Oatly sold out of milk like globally a couple of years ago because there were so many people that were adopting this replacement product, which was marketed as a replacement for milk, but a lot of people who were going for milk intentionally, like sort of cow's milk intentionally, were thinking that the oat milk actually tasted nicer in coffee. So I think this is kind of a great example of how we can envision this sort of meat transition starting. Yeah.
I remember the shortage of Oatly, and it was a dire time, and the pandemic's bad too. But that was
bad. No, we can't trivialize these things. It's too soon. Yeah. It's happening right now. Now, connected to the milk topic, great question from Jessica. Given the amount of pushback that producers like almond milk and other dairy alternatives receive from the current dairy industry in terms of labeling, do you foresee labels like beef and chicken becoming politicized as cultured meat becomes more mainstream?
Becoming politicized. Well, as we noted in the presentation, it's definitely already politicized, and it's no secret why. There is a huge amount of money, frankly, in that industry, and an existing method of producing meat. And as the definition of meat changes, and as consumers increasingly want this new product, that industry needs to change with the times. And some of them will have a harder time doing so for whatever reason. And so they tend to pull back against that societal shift. So yes, you do see that. I think it's unfortunate. I think that, but encouragingly, if you look at some of the biggest meat players, Tyson and Cargill being first to mind, they're on board. They are invested in this new, not just cultivated meat side, but also on the plant-based meat side, because they recognize that the definition of meat is changing. And essentially they have a relationship with the consumers, store shelves, branding, product formats that the consumers are used to. And now they just recognize that they can make their meat a different way. Like under the hood, you have this new technology fueling the meat production, which they're fine with. They're still a meat company.
Exactly, because for them, it's a form of portfolio diversification. It's not really like posing a threat. But I think the players for whom this is maybe a threat are on the production side rather than the processing side. So a great question is connected to this from Kieran. Is have you had much success convincing any conventional animal industry players about the sort of novel or changing definition of meat, especially those who are most impacted, like farmers, so specifically not the processors and sort of downstream role players like Tyson and Cargill?
Yeah, so it's a great question, because there are the type of meat that is produced, the animals produced, there are very different ecosystems. So we make, for instance, pork, and pork tends to be much more of a consolidated ecosystem, so much more vertically stacked players. So more often single entities will own everything. They'll own the upstream pigs themselves, and then the feeding, the growing the pigs, the slaughtering, the processing, the branding, distribution, sales, all of that. And so for them, it's an easier switch, because again, they're just changing the the top of the funnel, if you will, and they own everything else. Now, in beef, on the other hand, you find that that's a much more fragmented market. And so you have these players, these individual ranchers, typically, that are producing the cows that then they feed into the system downstream. And so it's harder to imagine them transitioning to the new system, which is why you see most of the pushback from the Cattlemen's Association, for instance, and much less so from the pork producers, from the chicken producers, much less so. So the question then is, what does that new ecosystem look like for the producers of those types of pork, or sorry, those types of beef, frankly? So it's helpful to note that the world is growing, and it's not just that we're going from 7.4 billion to 9.7 billion by 2050, but it's also that the demand for protein is increasing across the developed and the developing world, especially in the developing world consuming more of a Western diet. And so when we look, I think there is, among people who are really mission focused, there's an idea that we're going to be rapidly transitioning to a place where we're not using any of the existing infrastructure or the existing method of producing meat. But I would say that the amount of protein that is anticipated will make that more difficult than many would like, for instance, on more the mission side. And so I would say that there is still going to be a place in the animal production system for traditional manufacturers, simply from market demand.
Yeah, definitely. This connects quite a lot to the previous discussion about centralized versus decentralized systems, where there's definitely going to be this sort of continuing production as we transition from different protein production methods. And also important to note, I think, from what you just mentioned, that the sort of structure that we're describing here for meat production that's different across species, that's a pretty American-specific perspective, right? I think that the structure for these production pipelines is quite different, like globally and regionally.
Definitely, yeah. The U.S. is very good at the industrialization of meat. In fact, we have exported the technology, and there are growing countries industrializing that are adopting U.S. technology. So that it's a big focus on the existing industry to export the technology itself.
Definitely, but in terms of like you were mentioning that pork, there's more sort of like vertical integration, and I think that this specificity is maybe not conserved across like different regions. So a few questions have come up about the combination of plant protein and animal protein. A great one from Elliot was, what percentage of animal cells versus plant materials do you think are needed to convince consumers that they're eating animal meat? And in your view, would there be any point in going past that threshold?
Yeah, so internally, as I've mentioned, we have an integrated team that does both sides. And so, yeah, we test that internally. So there is a threshold amount that you can detect where, for instance, it's all plant, and then you add like a few cells in there, and it's in the low single digits. And I won't give exact numbers, but low single digits. So then you can tell, like, aha, that's cultivated meat, and then, or meat in general. So then the sweet spot, as you say, or the sweet spot, the next question is like, what, I think the articulation was, what is the highest amount that, or how was it asked?
Like at what percentage do you think, like at what threshold percentage do you think somebody would notice that they're eating animal cell, like an animal-based burger versus a plant-based burger? Mm-hmm. Or a piece of meat, not burger.
Oh, I see. So essentially, to be able to come out the same in a blind taste test, for instance. So what is the amount? Those are studies we have done less of. So I don't have internal data on that. I would have to. I think there are, my friend Paul Shapiro at the Better Meat Co. could probably answer that pretty well. I know they've done studies like that. It's probably no surprise that as we come to market first, that it's the unit economics of the individual product are very important. And so there's always a question of what tastes best or what experience is best to consumers, and then how much that how much you're able to make, or what the cost of that product is, and then how much of that you're able to make. And then, frankly, what the demand is. So there's, as we noted, an increasing demand for the plant-based products. And so the idea out there that people need to have a certain amount, that this is what the definition of meat is, and you have to have that amount, is not actually borne out by what consumers want, because consumers are increasingly, again, seeing that the definition is changing. And so what we're much more interested in is making a product that consumers will prefer and will eat, as opposed to some definition of what we think meat is classified as.
So would you say, maybe to answer the second part of this question, which is there any point in making sort of cultivated meat that has a higher proportion of animal cells versus, or animal protein versus plant protein than is sort of detectable? Would you say that the decision of that proportion is made by sensory analysis rather than like meeting a threshold?
Well, so there's always what the sensory will tell you. So we do, blind taste tests continuously in-house. And then there is that's on the, if you will, early product development side. And then there's what you can roll out to the market and what consumers actually want. Because I guess what I'm hearing is maybe implicitly is the goal to make a product which is exactly the same, that people can't tell a difference? Or is it to make a product that people like and prefer and will buy? I think it's the second one. That's what we're actually doing. So in my mind, the question of, does this exactly behave like what has been made before, I think is less interesting and less relevant, frankly, than, do consumers really like this? Will they buy this? Will they replace the center of the plate meat, traditional or slaughtered meat product that they've been eating with this product? And that's what we're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. So since we're talking about taste, great question from Luke. Impossible and Beyond Meat, sorry. I'm really on the burger thing. We have the the history of cultured meats panel in my mind. So Impossible and Beyond Meat have had great success emphasizing taste. But they built this on the perception that plant-based meats are healthier than conventional meats. When considering winning consumers over to cultured meat, do you see a need for a similar lever for consumers, and what might that be? We think of pork, we make pork, and there's a lot of reasons we've chosen pork. The biggest is it's the biggest meat market in the world. Most people of anybody else, of any other people on earth, eat pork. I did not articulate that well. But a lot of pork is eaten. And so if you think about pork compared to other meats, you probably don't eat pork because it's the healthiest. You can think of, maybe chicken. Some people think that certain types of beef is certainly healthy. Why do people eat pork? The taste. So you have to emphasize taste first. If you emphasize something else as more important to those consumers, then you've lost those consumers, because they are choosing because of taste. So yes, for us, the number one reason is taste. And so when you, even going back to the first time we did this, when we took muscle cells from pork, from our cultivated meat, and the fat cells, put them in a frying pan, fry them up, and eat it, it was bacon. It's not even, doesn't taste like bacon. It's bacon. And so we have a kind of baseline advantage because the cultivated meat is meat and tastes exactly like meat. And so then it's just a matter of what is the right amount to put in the product so that the plant-based portion then highlights that and brings that out, balances that. So taste, number one. Yeah, that's the hook. Number one. Always
taste.
We had a great soundbite yesterday. I don't think I'm going to quote it correctly, but somebody said something along the lines of like taste is king and cost is queen.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of nice. So a very sort of technical question in regards to like naming regulations from Doug. In reference to your slide about Missouri and Mississippi labeling of plant-based meats, do state regulators have any leverage other than labeling, or does the USDA / the FDA oversee all other regulatory compliance at a federal level? And this is, again, a super American market focused question.
Yeah, so the second circumstance that he described is definitely the true one. So as in the federal authorities have ultimate say on the status of the definition of meat, the classification. So that doesn't mean that those are unimportant laws, and the entities that are pushing that, they know that, because what it is intended to show, even though it doesn't really show that, what it's intended to show is that the people don't want these new types of meat. That they're intending to show that the people don't acknowledge that the definition of meat is changing, which, as we've seen, is not actually true. But if you can make that argument, then you can convince, ideally, the federal regulators that is the case, and then the federal regulators will act in, hopefully, compliance with what the people want. So that is kind of like the high level, very high level strategic goal of those types of organizations. But I think you can't change this tsunami of perception of what the definition of meat is. That's changing, and attempting to lock it into what the old definition of meat is very Luddite. It will lose, because people are changing. The definition of meat is changing.
Yeah, but at the same time, these laws or these measures do exist. So even though on the one hand we have this idea that the perception of meat is changing, on the other hand you see these conversations being so fervently fought and won by entities who want to sort of preserve it. So I think it's going to be really important, or maybe you can maybe speak to that. How do we balance this, what we see as a perception of changing definitions of meat with, actual regulation that wants to conserve what is clearly, to our understanding, and that sort of outdated vision?
Well, so we are very focused on it. I don't mean to play down and say that it's not something we're focused on, because we're a member of AMPS, which is the Alliance for Meat, Poultry, and Seafood, and we focus. The big goal is to have ongoing conversation with the federal regulators, because the federal regulators set the standard for the entire nation, regardless of what the state legislators say. And so that for us is what our focus. But there's no doubt that the ongoing state battles, that we keep an eye on those. We think it's much more important to use our very limited bandwidth as a startup to what we think is the most impactful. But we welcome the other great organizations that are in those state battles that are helping us out, and so we offer them assistance wherever we can.
Great, thanks. So to get a bit more on the technical side, away from the sort of societal perception side, a question coming from Brian, which is, what organoleptic properties are provided by the cultured animal cells that cannot be found in the diversity of the plant kingdom?
That's a great question. So and you could probably appreciate that I can't go that much into detail about what our internal research has shown, but ask anybody on the plant-based side, that you can certainly get a lot of organoleptic properties of meat from plants, but you get them with other types of tastes. You get these off tastes. And so what a lot of plant-based meat making is it's covering and masking the off tastes. So it's saying that, we get this organoleptic property from this plant, but then it comes with this bitter or this grassy taste. And so what can we use to cover that up? Is it salt? Salt's pretty popular. Is it sugar? So there are a bunch of things that you need to add in there. And so then this comes with some of the health concerns that people have around more of the plant-based side, which is you have these other ingredients added into there. And a lot of these other ingredients then are to that are necessary to kind of balance that out. So the nice thing about the cultivated meat is it's intrinsic, so it has those tastes. Now those tastes are influenced by what you feed the cells. So the media that you feed the cells. So the media is not just to help the cells grow, but also to impart the flavor. And so we can, that's what I'm saying is what's really important for us as a company is to have both sides of the team there actually balancing that out. We have to balance what the cells are offering with what the plants are offering. And I don't think you can successfully take the perspective that we focus entirely on the cells and we make the cells taste great, and then we hand that off to a chef or we hand that off to somebody else to go do the rest of the product. I don't think that's a quick, or I don't think that's an efficient strategy, because you have to have that continuous product iteration. And it's also not a strategy for making a volume product. It's a strategy perhaps for making a custom product or one-off product. So if you go take your cells and hand them to a chef so that the chef can go in and make this bespoke product for somebody at a fine dining restaurant, great, that works. But that doesn't mean that you can make 1 million of those. And it certainly doesn't mean you can make 1 million of those at a cost perspective or unit economic perspective that actually can scale and make the impact that frankly most of us in the field are here to make.
Yeah, absolutely.
So bottom line, we focus on making the whole product a balanced product.
Yeah.
We're a full product company.
So sort of thinking already of the product, a question from Graham, which I think is a really interesting one. How do you plan to win over consumers to have them incorporate these products into recipes they're already making with what they currently consider flesh meat? Do you think that a cookbook could help bridge any gaps that might exist, or even restaurant applications?
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Short answer is yes. So and we can again see this with our friends on the plant-based side. So in the beginning, you can probably appreciate that there were a few places that they went, a few places that we'll say Impossible Beyond, especially Impossible because they went to restaurants first. There were a few places that they went first, and those places had, there was a certain way that they anticipated that the meat would be cooked. And so they prepared and they iterated the product to meet that need. And over time, though, you can increasingly expand the functional capabilities of the product in order to meet a different types of cooking. And so increasingly, you can treat the product, the plant-based meat product, more and more as a meat which mimics the conventional product, the slaughtered meat. Now, in the beginning, it's as you note, it could be very handy to have a cookbook, for instance, that's made specifically for cultivated meat, that's able to meet the unique functional benefits that these products have. And I mean, we haven't been working on that. I think it's pretty interesting, and somebody wants to talk to us about it, we're open. But I think there's beyond the existing products, I think that there are cookbooks of the future that are then able to take this new technology and use it in all the ways that we can't use the old technology. So I'd be very interested not just in a cookbook to kind of bridge the gap, but then a cookbook of the future that says like cultivated meat along with these other types of meat or these other types of ingredients in order to make a new definition of meat, that can be made or that can be used in all these different types of applications and cooked in these entirely different ways. And I'm much more interested in that product. Yeah, that cookbook, that'd be really cool.
I think a very nice speculative cookbook exists. Do you know it? I think it's called
what is it called? I forgot. We have it. It's we bought it and it's sitting at the bookshelf at work.
But it's full of fun stuff like knitting a meat sweater and
yes.
Stuff like that. I mean, very, very.
Yes, the authors are shaking their fists at us right now. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Say my name. Yeah,
I'm so sorry.
Like never ending story, Okay.
Somebody remembers the name of the book, please share it in the Slack. It's a great one. I'm reminded also of when bananas became available sort of outside of their native grown areas due to refrigeration, people didn't really know how to cook them. So for example, when bananas arrived in the United States, there was a really exotic fruit in the way that the banana mafia, for lack of a better term, incorporated bananas into our sort of day-to-day lives was through cookbooks and incorporating bananas in sort of featured menus at fancy restaurants that were covered by the media. So it's another example of sort of marketing changing our perception of reality, because now bananas are one of the most ubiquitous fruits, even though they're non-native to the majority of our regions.
Yeah, great example.
The in vitro meat cookbook. Thank you, Leah.
There it is. Yes.
Thanks so much.
That's very good. Many fond hours pouring over the in vitro meat cookbook.
So thinking about the sort of hybrid products that you are planning to produce, question from Grant: what type of strategic partnerships in your supply chain or distribution or R&D do you need to expedite bringing your hybrid products to market?
That's a very company-specific question. What strategic partnerships do we need to expedite? I'm not sure I'd be able to answer that question without revealing probably what I don't want to reveal about our strategic partnerships. So what can I say? I mean, there's some really interesting, so we make sausage, for instance, and I think it became clear to us as we were iterating the product that the casing, for instance, it's very crucial. So those of you who are familiar with traditional sausage making, it's from the intestines. You clean the intestine out and you pack it in the intestine. And the way that intestine breathes when it's cooked is very different than a lot of the vegan type of casing, which doesn't behave the same way. And so we have, as we're iterating our product, we've had an amount of effort put on what is the right type of casing to use, what type of right supplier to use, and I don't find that, because most of the vegan sausage products out there, they aren't making meat inside of them. Like we're making the cultivated meat inside of that vegan casing, but then when you cook the cultivated meat, it doesn't behave like slaughtered meat, conventional meat, when you cook it inside of the casing. So it doesn't breathe the same way. So we would be really interested in somebody who's interested in making a casing, a non-animal based casing that behaves the same way when you cook it as a pork intestine. So actually making pork intestine from a cultivated meat perspective is not something that we're going to do. That is an entirely different challenge that we do not have the bandwidth to take on. But that'd be great. Someone else could. We'll buy it from you. Oh, you were muted, Frea.
Classic. I was saying it's a call to action.
Yes, that's my call to action.
for anybody out there who's interested in making cultivated pork intestine casings.
Yes. We'll buy it.
So, a phenomenal question that's not so specific on the company. Sorry for that. From Vince, which is that a traditional pork roast has different muscle groups, both red and white. Is this a feature that you can achieve with the hybrid concept? So thinking of hybrid muscle groups in a hybrid final product that is plant and animal protein.
Yeah. So there's a lot to say here. And I don't want to say all of what we know, because this represents essentially we have done the research on what is the best part of a pig to go and pull flesh from in order to make the highest quality pork sausage, right? So having done that, then there is a certain amount of, essentially you have this mix of different types of, as we say, white and red, but then also slow twitch and fast twitch fibers in order to impart a certain taste, a certain experience that consumers are used to. And you can pull tissue from all over all different parts of the pig, and they'll give a very different sensory experience. But if you go, for instance, to the nicest restaurants where people are willing to pay the most, then it comes from a certain part of the pig, but then a certain type of mix. And so, yes, we have determined what that is. I think that's a distillation of the question. And so yes, it's a mix of a lot of different types of fibers. And so we can, we target replicating that.
Yeah, it's always nice to hear that. I mean, one of the huge advantages that we can access, of course, is that instead of having just one cut on one animal that is the sort of highest quality, now we can make every cut that matches these like high quality parameters that have been established by culture and cuisine and agriculture over the past millennia.
Right.
So maybe the redefinition of meat also kind of is an increase in quality.
Yeah. So it's our technology platform. It is the car. It allows us to make something. I mean, there's only so much that over time that the traditional meat industry has been able to engineer an animal in order to give us a different taste. So an animal didn't evolve to give us a different taste. It just evolved to use its muscle and its fat connected tissue to survive. And so it's not lost. It shouldn't be lost on us that there's only so far that you can go making that meat taste better. But if you strip away the animal itself and actually focus on the cells and also like the changing definition of meat, then you have unlimited potential to make an entirely better product that meets our taste needs, our aroma, our sensory needs in an entirely different and better way. So that's the future of meat that we're making.
Yeah, absolutely. Evolving it to us rather than the other way around, or in a more pointed way. Yeah. All right, so we're coming up to the end of our time here. Let's just get a couple more questions in. An interesting one about sort of perception coming from Carol, which is, I perceive American politicians and industry lobbyists as the most difficult hurdle, more so than changing sort of consumer minds about cell-based meats. What do you think is sort of best approach to sway these, for example, lobbyists and politicians? And specifically, how can millennials take these powers on?
So there are a few methods that we look at, and the fear of missing out is true for people of all ages, including politicians. And so if they feel that they have made a tremendously poor decision by making it more difficult for us to come to market, the other countries and regions in the earth, they may not be as beholden to incumbent industries. And so if they make it easier for us to go to market, then we and our technology go there. And the market goes there, and the new jobs, the new safer, cleaner jobs that come from producing this meat go there. And so being responsible for that dramatic shift in industry moving out of the country, I don't think any politician really wants. And so reminding them of that continuously, I think will be very helpful.
Great, thanks. And I think probably like a nice, fun last question, going again in the speculative direction. What are your thoughts around molecular food or modular food as a future concept, kind of like bio bricks for food?
Ooh. Well, I'm very fond of talking to the team and saying that the cells taste like meat. But why do they taste like meat? What is it that the cells are? The cells are little factories that are producing the food sensory experience. How are they producing it? What exactly are they producing it? How do we turn it up to make more of that? So the question isn't even speculative. It's what we focus on. You can say simply, we need to drop the cost of cells and we need to increase the production of the cells. And if say you do that by, we'll say 1,000-fold, right? So we'll say 3 orders of magnitude, both drop the cost and then increase the production. Well, what if you were able to make an individual cell make the food sensory characteristic 3 orders of magnitude better? Well, then you solve that problem. And so looking at the molecular constituents of the food sensory is something that we do in-house. And there isn't that much research out there, believe this, we've looked. And so it became incumbent on us to go and do that research. So we're taking a look at that, but very important and not speculative at all.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. The molecular level with regards to the sensory experience is exactly the sort of knob that we get to turn and have an opportunity to now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have a few open questions left. I think some of them were already addressed that are related to the sort of interactions between the plant-based and the cell-based constituents of hybrid products. But the remaining questions, we'll migrate those over to the Slack, and I think we're pretty much at time now. So thank you so much, Brian. This was a really, really cool discussion. Sure. Yeah, and hope you guys enjoy the rest of the program for today.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.